now we're going to come to the sleeve. I know you've all been waiting for this one. It is a really cool technique and it's nothing to be frightened of. So you've got your pattern for the slit thing there. It's a long one and you have to cut it in half, and then we iron over from the top and from either side. And I'm using about 7 mil here, but actually I'm just going by the stripe. It is all worked out for a centimeter, but it doesn't have to be a centimeter. Whatever feels right here, between 5 millimeters and a centimeter is absolutely fine. And we're also going to do the cuff here. And I have cut away my pattern to the dashed line. So now I can fold this over. And I have got a little bit of a template to make sure that both sides are exactly the same. And the width of this is actually important. So I would do it like that. I wouldn't just guess, because you might not get the right width. On the other one, the little stripy one, it can be slimmer. It doesn't make any odds, but this really can't be slimmer. So you do need to use a pattern template, sorry. And then you move them on top of each other. Good sharp press. Yeah, we can do the top. Now you can just fold it straight over, do the slight slant, or do what I do, a 90-degree angle here. It doesn't matter, whatever you like best. I like it with a really massive peak. Don't know if that's even very nice, but I like it. So. Give it an iron from the outside as well. It's got to be really sharp, lots of steam here, lots of heat. And the important thing is that the stripy part is slim. Otherwise, you'll get into trouble when you put this on. Now, put the stripy part with the ironed over end right underneath the small end of the slit. You see, the shorter end. There we go. Put it under. And then all we have to do is pin this in. And then the other bit can roll over the top and we put the other side on. There you go, triple stitch, maybe secure that one as well. And now we're going to take the other side of the cuff and we just put that one in. And it's not necessary to fold the upper part in because it's covered anyway and it will be really thick. So there is another little video which shows this individually as well where I do that. So there is more than one way to row. And again, you can see why it needed to be slimmer, because we are going to stitch down here, and what we didn't want to do was to catch the little stripy fabric underneath it. So pin it on the side. Can move it out just to be sure, and I'm going to triple stitch all of this down, and then when I get to this point here I just catch it, and if you're not sure that you're going to know where that is, put a pin in, and then we're going to stitch across from that point and do a little cross again. So first I move the underneath out. Anyone knows what these things are called in English? Please let me know. I call it a gentleman's cuff. So again, take your time here, and then when you get to the top you can move that bit back under and straighten it all out. It won't have caught it anyway, but it's just better safe than sorry, I always think. Make sure that your needle is down when you turn, and make sure it's straight, because you very easily get a little bit of not a pleat, but extra length in there, and then it doesn't lie entirely flat. And of course I'm not showing you this, but I did have that on a shirt as well, so it's very easily done. You need to make sure that this lies really, really flat. If you can't quite get there, and it doesn't really matter. You know, I don't think you would even see it if you inspected my shirts, but of course when you're starting to be like a real perfectionist, you know, you see all your little mistakes. So we're sewing straight across from here, and then at an angle into the other corner, Ta-da! I love this. It is so simple. If you've got the right pattern that shows you exactly, you know, the right width and everything, and it works, and you do it like this, it's such an easy technique. And from the inside, it looks really clean as well. And you can see how it covers that rough edge from the outside. You didn't really need to turn that in. Now we're going to do our sleeve. Put a gather thread in all the way around the top. The reason I'm doing this is because it makes it easier to put in. We're not actually going to gather anything, of course. We're just going to make sure that it sits nice and round. So make sure it's a 1 centimeter seam allowance, that you're stitching the largest stitch available on your sewing machine, and then you pull the under thread so that you can hold in the top of the sleeve a bit. Now on the sleeve you've got all these notches that you've put in, which will then line up with the notches in the sleeve. So make sure that you've got the right sleeve there. And here we go. We're going to pin this in from snip to snip. And people that are maybe not for the first shirt, if you are one of these ladies that is making stuff with my patterns to sell, then you very likely will just work with the snips after a while, because you know they're in the right position. So because it does take time to pin things in, and with more experience you can just use the snips. That's why I did them. If it wasn't for you guys sewing my stuff, I wouldn't have put them in, because that took ages to get them in the right position. Every time I thought I had them right and I did another sample, I thought, oh no, they're not right, I have to do them again. So back to the drawing board. So I hope you really appreciate that little bit. That makes it so much easier, just rather than giving the center, top and stuff. So make sure you get it all in, and then we're ready to sew the sleeve in. Sewing the sleeve in is also not the easiest of all tasks, especially if it's a sleeve like this, which really is very fitted. It's not one that hangs over. I do take my time with the pinning to do it really nicely, but then when it's in, it will sit beautifully. It's so nice, and you can top stitch it either to the inside, which is a little bit harder, or on the sleeve, or in fact not top stitch at all. When you're stitching in your sleeve, it's very important that you do very small steps at a time, and then with the needle down you move the sleeve around a bit. You can also, of course, help yourself with a needle. Sometimes the fabric pushes, so then you hold it in place with that pin. And also you need to make sure that the fabric doesn't pull over the shoulder head, because it will want to do that. It needs to be edge to edge from one side to the other side. Now I've sewn this in. You can now iron this into the shirt, but we first of all have to overlock it. And I'm also going to cut off a little bit while I'm overlocking it. Make sure that it's really flat around there. If you're uncertain that you're not going to cut into anything, people get really scared of using the overlocker there. Disable the knife and cut it back a little bit before you start overlocking. Just a tiny bit now. I don't cut off much. In fact, I probably cut off a bit too much on this one. Don't want to sew into your actual seam. I mean, I'm really close to it there. It's okay. Now you can iron it in or out. I'm going to iron it towards the shirt, because that looks, I think, the most professional. Most shirts are done like that. And I'm going to triple stitch it all the way around. If you are doing a shirt for an older boy, you might want to also then top stitch it. Just with foot width again, that looks really nice. Make sure that the seam allowance remains towards the shirt. That's not how the seam allowance wants to sit. This is why we had to cut it back, because the longer the seam allowance, the more resistance is there, because you've got a smaller space going into a bigger space. If you're having a fabric that has a slight stretch in it, actually the sleeves will be a breeze. If you have a fabric like I do here, which is more like a jacket fabric, then it's harder. On this one, I've actually top stitched into the sleeve. That's my other example. I'm not a great fan of that. I prefer it onto the other side. Now we're going to put the sleeve together, and that's so easy. All you have to do is pin it from one end to the other. So I always put a pin at the bottom, pin on the underarm, pin at the end of the sleeve, and then with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, I put this together. Then I'm going to overlap it. Again, I cut a little bit off because I am going to top stitch my side seam, and you could top stitch all the way down to the sleeve if you dare. I did it for the bigger shirts. Honestly, for the little shirts, no way I could get in there without hassle, and I didn't want that. I am the seam towards the back and then just top stitch to the underarm, and that's, I think, totally fine. Now I'm going to put the cuff on. And the nice thing is, because we have got a pleat that we can adjust if the cuff didn't quite fit, because everyone will put on the slit finish slightly different. So you might be a couple of millimeters out, you might be a couple of millimeters, shorter or wider, and you can adjust that in the pleat. But if you've done it exactly like I do here, it will fit on perfectly. So just go around, pin it, and where you have the pleat, where you have the seam, sometimes it's a good idea to also pin that down so that when you are sewing, you are not going to have it flip over to the other side. So I'm going to put a pin there to avoid that. And then you need to turn your sleeve, because you always want to work from the inside. It's just massively difficult to do it the other way around. So place this under the sewing machine like that, and then just move it around as you go. And I hope you can still see it, because it's such a small shirt I'm doing. I do it to save fabric as well, Plus, my little model from Texas, hello, is only a small boy, so I wanted to have that fitting. Go straight across. So it's the same technique that we've already used. We are just going to, now that we've got the outside cuff on, put the inside cuff over the top. It's much, much easier than preparing the cuffs before. The first thing here is to really iron the seam to the cuff, very sharp edge. So do this right. And then you, same as on the collar, you place the contrast or the same fabric underneath it, go all the way around, make sure that you have a smaller stitch when you go and do your round parts, because we're going to really cut that back, and that you come down dead straight right next to the line here. I'm sorry I didn't show more of that, because I just thought I'd pressed record and I hadn't. Now I'm going to cut this back to make sure that I can, turn it. Otherwise there's too much fabric. And we do the same as on the collar. You just need to leave a little bit standing of the contrast, or basically the inside fabric, because of course we're going to turn that around the other seam allowance and fold it in. If we can't do that because it's cut down too much, then that's not a good idea, is it? So now it's going to be pressed, And then the same way as on the collar, we turn it in and we pin it. And we pin it so that the stitch line is just visible, exactly the same as on the collar. It's very important you press this really well before you start pinning. And I've done that here already, so that'll take some time, but it does look so good when it's done well. And now we're going to top stitch all the way around there. And again, have your actual shirt into the sewing machine. You start on what is more difficult actually, but then as you go around, of course, the shirt moves around as well, and then it's easier. So again, if you start on the other side because you think that's easier, you would be sadly mistaken. So start this way so that your fabric remains on the left hand side and your eye is on the right, because for a right-handed person, that is the edge of the fabric. That's where my concentration has to be on. And you can see I still move the pins out even though I don't have to. I just want a really nice and even seam for all those close-up photographs and footage. Don't want to show myself up, do I? So secure, and you've got a really lovely cuff. Now that isn't very difficult. It's just a lot of steps that you need to follow, and you need to do them really nicely. Do not be too lazy to go to your ironing board. You need to iron.